Hello and welcome to the Parsha class. It is pre-recorded today with some scheduling conflicts, but it's also sponsored today. Sponsorship opportunities are always available for the classes. Tonight's class is sponsored by Irina Aminova in memory of her father Eliyahu Cohen ben Cohen Chai on his yard site, which was on the 18th of Mar Cheshvan. May the support of Torah bring his soul higher and higher in heaven and be a merit for her and her family and for all of us. Quick summary of the parsha. We'd like to have a little parsha in a nutshell. So Chayei Sara is very easy to summarize. It begins with the death of Sara. It continues with the buying of Marat HaMachpela by Avraham in order to bury Sara, and then continues with the need for Avraham to find a fitting match for his son Yitzchak. And he sends Eliezer, his servant, to go find the right girl. Eliezer finds Rivka, convinces the family that this is a good match, and then brings Rivka to Yitzchak. Avraham, at this point, remarries, marries Keturah, and has children with her. And and before he dies, he gives gifts to those children, and of course to Yitzchak. He gives over the majority of his mission in life. That is to bring Hashem's message down to earth and the continuation of the Jewish people. With that short summary, let's now continue with, we'll go into some depth here. We'll go a deep dive into the psukim themselves. We'll start with why not start here with in Bereshit? Yeah. So the Bereshit Chav Gimel Bet. This is the second pasuk in the parsha. After we're given Sarah's age, the pasuk says, "V'tamat Sara b'Kiryat Arba." Sarah died in this place called Kiryat Arba. He Chevron. It's also called Chevron. Be'eretz Canaan, it's in the land of Canaan. V'yavo Avraham lispod l'Sara v'liv kota. Avraham came in order to mourn Sarah, to give a eulogy, to eulogize Sarah, and to cry over her. They had an intense love, and she died. Avraham missed her, and he cried because of that. The Midrash, amongst other things, wants to know the answer to a very strange point made in this verse. The verse says that V'yavo Avraham came, like as if he was somewhere else. So where was he? Where did he come from? Why wasn't he there when she died, holding her hand or whatever? Doesn't have to be romantic, but where was Avraham? Why wasn't he with her? So there are a few different opinions given. One is the Midrash Bereshit Rabbah 58:5 quotes Rabbi Levi, who says that he came to Sarah from Mikvurato Shel Terach, from the funeral of Terach, Avraham's father. So if you do the math, we know how old Avraham was when he left Terach. We also know how old Terach was when Avraham was born. So based on that, you can figure out that Terach died around the same time as Sarah. There seems to be a discrepancy of 2 years, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But around the same time for sure. And so Avraham was in some sort of process of mourning for his father, and then all of a sudden he had to go and mourn his own wife. Yeah, so that's the second opinion quoted in the Midrash is Rabbi Yossi, who points out that Terach has actually died 2 years before Sarah, as mentioned earlier. El Mehechan Ba, where did he come from? Mehar HaMoriah. He came from Har HaMoriah. Sarah Ototzar. She died when she learned of this this very difficult situation with the binding of Yitzchak, her son. So this caused her to die. And there's other midrashim about that. Lefichach nismacha akeda v'hayu Chayei Sara. So that's why the last thing that's mentioned in last week's parsha is the akeda, and the first thing mentioned in this week's parsha right afterwards is Sarah's death. So there's a link there. So where did Avraham come from? Avraham came from the akeda. He came back from home from the akeda and he found that his wife had died. That's one opinion. That's the midrash. And the Chizkuni, a famous commentary, medieval commentary. So he says something else. He says, Avraham mi Be'er Sheva. So where was Avraham at the time? Avraham lived in a different place, not where he told his wife to be. He lived somewhere else. He lived in Beersheba. Lishpol de Sara, and he came to mourn Sara. He bought for her a burial ground. Ki lo hayu sham makom moshavo, because that was not his usual place of staying. Now, why would the Chizkuni mention that? Why would he say something opposite of what the Midrash says? Well, you have to understand the Midrash, although we sort of implied that the Midrash is using the last psukim of last week's parsha about the Akeda, and it transitions right into the story of Sarah's death. The truth is, actually, the last few psukim of last week's parsha were not about the Akeda. They were about the birth of Rivka's family. Therefore, and mentions, among other things, mentions that Avraham went to Beersheba. So if he went to Beersheba, so now we have to account for why he's in Beersheba and she's not. So the Chizkuni tells us that there's two major reasons why Sarah was not in Beersheba. The Chizkuni says, first of all, Avraham didn't want her to be in Beersheba when he didn't want her to be where he was leaving for the Akeda, because he didn't want her to stop him. Right? So get her to leave. And second of all, as we see that she died, it seems, according to the Chizkuni, the simple explanation is probably that she was sick already, and she needed the avira, she needed the fresh mountain air of Efron to get over her illness, and maybe that would help. So that's why, says the Chizkuni, that indeed Avraham came to eulogize Sarah from Be'er Sheva, because that's where he was and she wasn't. Okay, let's go on to our next topic here. Next topic, we're going to skip just a few psukim, about 7 psukim, to Breshit 23:9. And here we're going to talk about the language that Avraham used to buy Marat HaMachpela, to buy this cave from Efron. So it says, "V'iten li et Marat HaMachpela asher lo." So after a lot of back and forth, Efron said, first he asked the children of Chet if he can have the land. They said, of course you can have whatever you want. Then he turns his attention to not somebody of Chet, so a Hittite by the name of Efron. He says to Efron, well, I want this particular place. He says, yeah, you can have the place. He says, I don't want the place, I want the whole field. There's a lot of back and forth. And then finally he says, V'iten li Marat HaMachpela asher lo. Give me the cave of Machpela that's yours, that he owns. He's talking to the children of Chet. Give me that. Asher biktzei sadehu b'kesav male, and it's at the edge of his field. And I want to pay full price. V'nitna li, he should give it to me. B'tochechem lachudat kever, and it's going to be for a burial site in your area, in your midst. So the Orach Chaim quotes the Zohar. Let's look at the Zohar real quick first, actually, if you don't mind. So the Zohar says an interesting thing. It says that why indeed did Avraham want this particular place? So it says he wanted this particular place because there's a story. It says he was chasing after some cattle in order to feed it to his guests, and it wandered into this cave, and he went to the cave, and he saw there was a holy place. He saw there was the burial place of Adam and Chava. So he saw there was a very holy place. Meanwhile, the question becomes, why did Efron not see this holiness? So the Zohar tells us that Efron la chavat itgali la havele chulkabe. He had no share in it. Didn't really fit him. It wasn't his. Uvegin kach lo itgile Efron klum lo havachame elechashocha. All he saw there, he didn't see anything in the cave. All he saw was darkness. The alda zabin law, and that's why he wanted to sell it. All he could see was darkness. To be more specific, other commentaries explain what he saw was basically he imagined that there was a demon haunting the place. This is a good time of the year to learn this. So he thought the place was haunted, so he was scared, and the place scared him, not inspired him. So he gave it up because of that. So based on that, we have a kind of halachic issue, says the Or HaChaim. All of these phrases, all of the words that are used in this verse to describe how Avraham bought the land, all of them have something to do with making it legally his. Because we have a concept in halacha called it's basically a concept that has to do with having a fair business deal. You can't, if you know something about the thing you're buying that the seller doesn't know, so it's not a fair business deal, right? If you go to a garage sale and you see the Mona Lisa there, and the owner doesn't know what it is, he thinks it's just a regular painting, and he's selling it for $5. And you're like, oh, great, good, that's a mitzvah, $5 sounds great. But the problem is that once he finds out that what he sold was actually worth several $1 million, so he's going to claim that was an unfair deal. So the same thing here. We don't want any kind of questions about the actual value of the place, because we don't want the sale to be voided. There's something called, like the concept in halacha is called onah, right? It's basically a lack of knowledge on I guess it's translated as price fraud, right? So you don't want any kind of claims, any kind of questions. What Avraham wanted was, he wanted to buy the land of Marat HaMachpela free and clear, no questions, no problems, and no potential for future issues with that. So to do that, he needed to be very, very specific with his language. So what does he say? So first of all, this is a long piece of Or HaChaim. I'm not going to quote the whole piece, but basically, he says that, for instance, that he uses the language of both a gift and he uses the language of a sale, because that's what it says. For instance, it says, "V'yitain li," he should give it to me. So it should be considered a gift, and also the money he's giving for it isn't a sales price; it's a gift also, and there can be no claims. Then he's giving me this thing, whatever it is, it's a gift. He doesn't have to worry about the price. There's no no when it comes to gifts. If you don't know the value of something that you're giving away, that's on you, right? That's not the same as a sale, where it's a commodity and you might just be unaware of the price. Here it's a gift. You're deciding to give it. So this man Efron is giving this gift, and Avraham is giving him a gift also of money. And by the way, though, it's not just any money. He gives him, as we'll see soon, he gives him 400 talents of silver. Right? There's a reason why he uses that particular number and that particular price, but and that particular commodity of silver and not other things, because of its value, its intended value, and its permanent value, and it's over lasocher. He gives it to him in a kind of way that basically implies that it can be used and reused in any kind of transaction. It is the kind of money that was trusted at the time. And besides that, he talks. Why is he talking to the children of Chet? And why is he considered this an estate? Why is he asking about the field? It's because he doesn't want any issues. Now there shouldn't be any issues of there's also a halacha unrelated to that. There's a halacha of selling land that has to do with the neighbors of the property have to agree. So there can't be any claims later on. There can't be any claims of any kind of liens on the property, any of that. Avraham wanted to avoid all of that, all of those possibilities. Was very exact in his language to avoid any future problems. It's an interesting that this is the Marat HaMachpela, which still exists today, is one of the examples of a sale in Tanakh that was very explicit and very clear, and still is with us today. Okay, that's the Or HaChaim, the holy Or HaChaim. Or HaChaim. All right, so the next 23:16. Bereshit 23:16. We're skipping another 7 verses. And since we mentioned the amount of money that Avraham is spending, it's worth a little it's worth a little bit to see an interesting gematria in this parsha. So it says in verse 16, 23:16, it says, Vishma Avraham el Efron v'yishkol. So in the verse that describes the sale and how Avraham paid it for it, it says, V'yishma Avraham el Efron. Avraham heard Efron. That means he basically accepted what Efron was saying. V'yishkol Avraham Efron, and he paid out to Efron et hakesef asher diber be'aznei b'nei Chet. He counted out the silver that he told him in the ears and within earshot of the children of Chet. Arba me'od shekel kesef, 400 shekels of silver. Over lasocher, that they were good for any kind of sale. Best quality money at the time. So the Balaturim is bothered by the fact that it says Efron twice in this verse, and each time it's spelled differently. Efron with a vav as the first time, and Efron without a vav the second time. It's the same person. Why do we need to play around with the vavs? So first he says Efron without a vav, chasar. So Efron chasar, in other words, Efron without the vav, missing something, missing the vav, is the gematria of ayin ra, which is which means a bad eye. Again, Efron is one of the classic examples in Tanakh of somebody who's jealous and wants things and wanted Avram's money in this case. And so that's what an ayin ra is. It's somebody who has desirous eyes, always looking to see what other people have and trying to get it for themselves. Furthermore, Efron ola tet, also the tough. So the Efron is also the gematria of tough, of, again without the vav, is the gematria of 400, as is ayin ra. Actually, no. How does that work? Efron is 480. 50. Yeah, so that's 400. It's connected arba meot shkalim. So it's the exact amount of money that Avraham paid him. It's 400 shkolim. So his gematria of Ayin Ra, right? So his gematria, Efron's gematria, is the exact equivalent of the amount of money that Avraham paid him. So that's what he gets in this world. And you might ask yourself, wait, if he's such a bad guy, why does he get what he wants? And you have to remember what Chazal tell us is that in this world, the evil people get what they want in this world, so that they don't have to get any reward in the eternal, continual reward of the world to come. So all they get is what they have in this world. So that's if that's what you want, then that's what you're going to get, and that's what Efron wanted. All right. We're going to just skip just a few psukim to 23:18. We're still in this. We're still in the sale section of our story here, and we're up to where he finally makes the sale all finalized. It says Avraham lemikne le'ine b'nei Chet. It became for Avraham a possession in the eyes of the children of Chet. B'chol ba'ei shar iro. Anybody who entered the gate of the town, everybody knew that was his. So the Meshech Chochmah wants to know, as should we, why does it say that this happened again in the eyes of b'nei Chet? We already know that this has been repeated several times. Why do we need to know that here at the very, very end of the whole deal, that this happened in their eyes? So he says, and this is very similar to what the Orah HaChaim said, and that is that he had to make sure, Avraham had to make sure that the sale was kosher 100% according to Jewish law. But what's interesting is, even according to their law, to the laws of B'nei Chet, the laws of this Gentile society, even according to their laws, there was the sale was 100% kosher and 100% legitimized. So Avraham had to basically, it was a difficult balance. It had to be kosher according to halacha. At the same time, it had to be kosher according to the local custom, according to the local law. The dina de malchuta dina, the law of the land, is the law also, and so Avraham had to make sure it was kosher on all fronts. It would not be in any way questioned in the future. Of course, there's no way to guarantee that, because the laws can change, people can change, and as we've seen, even the most legitimate sale can be contested. So the Meshech Chochmah brings, for example, the Shulchan Aruch, Choshen Mishpat 190, tells us that land can be acquired by three possible things: by kesef, shtar, and chazakah. So either by kesef, which is payment, a shtar, a document, or a chazakah, which means basically you're proving that you own the land by physically doing something to the land that only the owner would do. Right? You dig a hole. A random stranger wouldn't go and dig a hole in somebody else's land. So if you do that to your land, you're proving that land belongs to you. It's kind of like laws of more or less like squatting laws. So according to Rav Chai Gon, though, a Jew can acquire land from a non-Jew only by transfer. So all of that's true for a Jewish sale. But here we have, this is more than a Jewish sale. We're buying this from a non-Jew. So there has to be some sort of restriction. Says Rav Chai Gon, a Jew can only buy the land from a non-Jew only through the transfer of a deed or the chazakah. So a shtar or a chazakah, so kesef does not do it. So because of this, the rabbis made a rule that whenever a Jew buys land or buys a house from a non-Jew in Eretz Yisrael, a document has to be written, by the way, even on Shabbat, since that kind of sale isn't going to be affected by the transfer of money. So why how's that relevant here? So that's why the pasuk had to emphasize according to their opinion, in their eyes, in the view of, in their perspective of law, the sale was good, and Avraham had to make sure of that. It became a legal acquisition, and then everybody could be happy, and there could be no problems of later contentions. All right, so we're going to skip. We spent quite a bit of time in the buying and selling of the kever of Sara, the Marat HaMachpela, which, as we know, by the way, is not just for Sara. Besides the midrash we quoted of Adam and Chava being there, eventually Avraham would be buried there, Yitzchak and Rivka would be buried there, and Yaakov and Leah were buried there as well. So it's a very holy place now, and a place definitely worth visiting if you have the opportunity. All right. So, but before we get to too much more about Rivka, let's learn a little bit about her, shall we? We are introduced to her in this week's parsha. It says, "Va'anara tovat marem me'od." She was very beautiful. Betula, she was a virgin. Ish lo yada, and a man did not know her. So that seems like it's something dissimilar from being a betula. V'tered ha'aina v'tmale kada v'tal. So she came to this spring of water that where Eliezer was waiting to find a wife for his master's son, for Yitzchak, and here she comes to fill her jug, and he had just finished praying that something like this, exactly this, would happen, that a relative of Avraham would come, and that she would be very generous and take care of his camels and take care of his men. And that's exactly what she does. Meanwhile, Rav Hirsch wants to know, what is this whole emphasis here on her morality? Nara, with one exception, wherever the word Nara appears in the Torah, it is written chaser, without the feminine hey. Hence, it includes katana, a girl who has not yet reached puberty. Only in the case of Motzi Shemra is a case in Devarim 22:19, where the husband accuses his wife incorrectly of having an affair. So only there Nara is written full. To teach that the laws of Motzi Shemra apply only to a Nara who is sexually mature. So basically, the word Nara implies, more than implies, it's used exclusively for sort of marking somebody as having had sexual experience or maturity. Betula stems from the word batal, which is related to patel, badal, to be separate and closed up unto oneself. Since betula has already been stated, ish lo yada cannot be referring only to virginity. Furthermore, Scripture does not say lo yada ish, as it does elsewhere, everywhere else, in fact, he says. But ish lo yada, a man did not know her, an expression that occurs nowhere else. The implication is this: not only was she a betula, a virgin, v'lo yada ish, and didn't know a man, she was also modest to the point that ish lo yada, no man knew her. Why? No man had ever dared to approach her out of familiarity or frivolity. A truly modest woman has great dignity. Without her knowing it, she makes such an impression that even the wildest youth would not dare to speak vulgarly in her presence, much less venture to set his eyes upon her lustfully. This was an extraordinary quality, all the more so in Aram. So she was basically, she purported herself in such a way that she was almost intimidating in her dignity, and nobody would say a word about her or to her that was unforward. By the way, we have in the last few comments here, they're all from Rav Hirsch, well, almost all from Rav Hirsch. I don't know if I should apologize for that or say you're welcome. Either way, I found a lot of his insights in this parsha were very, very relevant today. We have a huge problem I've found in where we in the world really, and that is that women do not often really recognize their own dignity. Um, even mentioning to them how dignified they should be, they say something to the effect of, "How can you legislate to me how dignified I should be?" I'm not legislating. It's not me. I'm just quoting what Chazal tell us, what the sages and the holy women of yesteryear have established as ways to keep your dignity. And we see it has repercussions. All right, so towards the end of the whole story with Eliezer finding a wife for Yitzchak, he brings her to Yitzchak. Yitzchak marries her, and the Chazal tell us what I think we learned in the Rashi last year, that the candles that Sarah lit, all of the miracles that occurred in Sarah's tent returned with the marriage to Rivka. So, but before all that, it says V'yeviyaha Yitzchak, and Yitzchak brought her in ha'ohela into the tent of Sara, imo of Sarah his mother, V'ikach et Rivka, and he took Rivka with he lowly isha, she became a wife to him, V'yahaveha, and he loved her, V'yinachem Yitzchak achar imo, and he was comforted finally after the death of his mother. So I guess he had not been comforted until this point. Says Rav Hirsch, and this is a famous comment. I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's nice to see it inside. This too is a characteristic that, thank God, has not vanished from among the descendants of Avraham, Sara, Yitzchak, and Rivka. The more she became his wife, the more he loved her. Like this marriage of the first Jewish son, most Jewish marriages, are contracted not on the basis of passion, but on the strength of reason and judgment. Parents and relatives consider whether the two young people are suited to each other. Therefore, their love increases as they come to know each other better. In other words, what he's answering is the question, the famous question of Yitzchak took Rivka as his wife, and he loved her. Shouldn't the loving come first? He loved her and then he married her, like with most of us. So the answer is no. The ideal is actually not to love each other yet. You don't know each other yet. You can lust after each other, but you don't really love each other. You haven't given to each other. So the only way that you can love each other is by marrying, and with the marriage and with the continuing success of the marriage, love increases. But if you don't love each other, why should you marry? The answer is, again, based on the Jewish concept of marriage. The marriage is sort of prearranged. It's not two random people who met, at a party or something. It's two people who already have common goals, common mission, and certain similarities that the parents of the bride, the parents of the groom, think that their marriage will be successful. So it's already been logically linked. They are logically linked to each other, using reason and judgment. They're linked to each other. And now that they're living together and giving to each other, now they can actually learn to love each other. He continues, most non-Jewish marriages are made on the basis of what they call love, in quotation marks. But we need only glance at novelistic depictions taken from life, and we immediately see the vast gulf in the non-Jewish world between the love of the partners before marriage and what happens afterwards. By the way, he's talking about realistic novels, which was all the rage then. He was living around the same time as Charles Dickens and Charlotte Bronte and the Victorian writers. Right? The whole point was, love is something that you can't just force onto somebody else. All these different stories, Pride and Prejudice type stories, right? But then you have like Then you have the other novels where the Anna Karenina type stuff, where somebody's married, is stuck in a loveless marriage. So that's not love either, right? That's not the ideal either. How dull and empty everything seems after marriage. How different from what the two partners had imagined beforehand. They had this whole idea, the Disney love affair, the happily ever after. And they get married, and things get boring, and they don't know each other, they don't love each other, like the David Copperfield and his first wife. Right? This sort of love is blind. Each step into the future brings new disillusionment. Not so is Jewish marriage, of which it says, "V'yikach et Rivka v'thi lo l'isha v'yahaveha." Here, the wedding is not the culmination, but only the beginning of true love. And now, four more words, which, since God led Chava to Adam until the end of time, have remained, will remain unsurpassed in beauty and glory. V'yinachem Yitzchak acharei imo, a 40-year-old man, inconsolable over the death of his aged mother, finds consolation in his wife. This is the position of the Jewish woman as wife. What nonsense to identify Jewish married life with Oriental sensuality of harem conditions. With Sarah's death, the feminine spirit and feeling departed from the home. Yitzchak then found his mother again in his wife. Hence, he brought Rivka where? Into the tent. To him, it was as though his mother were again there, as it says in the Midrash 60, Bereshit Rabbah 60:16. This is the highest tribute that has ever been paid to the dignity and nobility of woman, and it is the ancient history of Judaism. So he's fighting here a historical, just to put this in historical context, he's fighting here a general kind of biblical scholarship that was around in his time in the late 1800s, is basically saying that Jewish marriage is basically similar to having a harem, having concubines and wives, and that's not the ideal. That's never been the ideal. Even a king who has unlimited resources, really, even the king should be limited to how many wives and concubines he has. All the more so, if you look at our forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, especially Avraham and Yitzchak, you see how dedicated they were to their one wife. They could theoretically have had many wives, and perhaps at the end of his life, Avraham did. But during Sarah's life, he had only one wife, and that was Sarah. All right. So speaking of the many wives of Avraham after Sarah died, the verse says 25:6. So this is already towards the end of the parsha, right before Avraham's death is described. It says, Avraham Natan Avraham matanot v'yishalchem al Yitzchak beno v'odenu chai kedma el eretz kedem. And so okay, one second. One second. So what kind of gifts did Abraham give to his children from his concubines? He gave them gifts. He sent them away from Yitzchak, from Yitzchak his son, while he was still alive. Kedma el Eretz Kedem. He sent them eastward to the eastern lands, so wherever that is. So there's different opinions about where we're talking about. And we're going to look, God willing, right now into the commentaries of Rashi, that's the Zakenim, and God willing, we'll get a chance to look again at the Zohar, our second time today. So first, Rashi says, Natan Avraham Matanot, Pershu Rabbeinu Shem Tuma Masar Lehem. So it says in the Gemara in Sanhedrin 91 that what the gift was that Avraham gave to his other children was that he taught them the names of Tuma. So we're not really sure what that means. So what is it that he taught them? And of course, Rashi, just so you know, Rashi gives a second opinion. Divrei acher ma shenitan lo al odot Sara, the things that he was given because of Sara, and we know that Avimelech and the Paro gave gifts to him because of taking Sara. So those gifts, all the other gifts that were given to him, he didn't really need these physical possessions. He had a spiritual journey, and he didn't need them. He didn't want to get any kind of pleasure, especially from those gifts that he got from them. That's Rashi, but I'd like to focus on the first answer of Rashi, and that is these names of Tuma. So that Zakanim Mebale Tosfot tells us that the Perush, he says, the explanation of these names of Tuma, Perush hu yucholim lehaske shem hamaforash betumat haguf v'lo yasik lahem. They were able to say the holy name of Hashem, which is a powerful, magical, almost name. You could we know Moshe Rabbeinu later on in the Torah kills a person by using this name. So they were able to use that name even while they were Tameh, even while they're impure themselves, and it would not harm them. That's the Canim then points out, V'gam hayom yesh yishmaelim, there are certain Muslims today, says the Datzakenim, they're experts in the name, Mazkirim Ota Betuma, they mention it in while they're impure, and obviously they're able to do difficult magical type things. So in other words, so the opinion of the Datzakenim to translate Rashi is that basically what Avraham taught these other nations is these Kabbalistic powers, really, of how to do certain kinds of practical magic, really, for lack of a better word. So that's the Canim. Of course, that's one opinion. Not to make too much of a point of it, there obviously we can question why would Avraham teach this kind of magic to these nations of the world. And it could be all kinds of reasons, but the difficulty in explaining this, considering that Avraham is such a holy person, why would he teach the names of Tuma to his descendants? So it could be that the Datzakenim says it could be that there's another thing that he taught them, not to do this kind of magic, but to avoid this kind of magic, to know what is tameh, to know what is impure, in order for themselves to remain pure. The Sefer Zohar in Chelik Aleph part Kuf says something else. And Zohar says that what Avraham taught them was the names of the kinds of spirits that they could conjure up to do their will and to have those kinds of powers. Now we know from later on in Tanakh that Shlomo, that Shaul himself, so it talks about Shlomo. It says in Malachim Aleph, Perek Hey, Pasuk Yud, so 5:10 in First Kings, that Shlomo Melech's wisdom was even greater than all the children of the East. So they had some sort of wisdom. The Pasuk is telling us they had some sort of magic or divination, and this is an allusion to the fact that the descendants of Avram's concubines were practicing some sort of magic that they became famous for, and might still be famous for even to this day. So that's what he taught them. Why did he teach them that? So it's not an easy answer, but there needs to be, for the world to reach its climactic conclusion with the coming of Mashiach, there needs to be an understanding of the spiritual realm in the world. It can't be a foreign concept. If it can't be that you can't bring it up if there's another dimension of life, a spiritual dimension. Can't even bring it up if people are it's a different language. So there needs to be some sort of potential for people all over the world to know that there is spiritual power in our physical world. There is a connection to it, and we have to be able to reach it. Do you want to reach it through holiness, or do you want to reach it through unholiness? So that's already there's the rub, right? That's what brings some conflict into life. Is how exactly do you want to live your life to the ideal? And that's one of the things that Avraham taught his descendants. Okay, and the last pasuk that we'll have time for today, 25:8, is about the actual death of Avraham. We've been studying Avraham for last. This is the third parsha in a row that's all about Avraham. Avraham is even mentioned in the end of Noah. So for 4 weeks straight now, we've been studying about Avraham's life, and of course, obviously, his descendants. The life of Yitzchak and Yaakov takes up the bulk of the rest of the book of Bereshit. Meanwhile, though, about his death, the pasuk says, "V'yigva v'yamat Avraham b'seva tova." So he breathed his last breath. He died in a good, happy old age. Tova b'seva tova. Zakin, he was old. V'savea v'yasef el amav. He was old and he was content, and he was brought to his people. V'yasef el amav. What could that possibly mean, that he's brought to his people? And this is a fundamental idea. Says Rav Hirsch, the expression V'yasef el amav expression attests to an idea that was so familiar to our people, we can proudly point to his familiarity to counter those who arrogantly say in the Old Testament there was no trace of the doctrine of immortality of the soul. In Rav Hirsch's time, at the beginnings of the Reform movement, there was already talk that this whole concept of Tchiyat HaMeitim, that the spiritual world where people go after they die, that's not mentioned anywhere in the Torah. Such arguments came on and off throughout Jewish history and philosophy. Even in the time of the Sadducees, the Essenes, there were already people who were talking about there's no such thing as a spiritual world, and they're wrong. The Torah itself hints to it, says Rav Hirsch. Certainly, Scripture does not teach this doctrine, but there's no need to teach it. A people that says of the dead, Ne'esef el Amav, and whose individual says of himself, Ani Ne'esef el Ami, I will return to my people, is so familiar with the idea of immortality. And the antithesis of this idea is so foreign to its whole way of thinking, that it would have been absurd to treat the belief in immortality as something that had to be taught. If the phrase, I am going to my people, means I am dying, that means you're going somewhere. You're going to your people. Your people are there somewhere. Obviously, it's not a physical location. Obviously, it's a spiritual location. Obviously, it's immortal. Your soul is still alive even after you die, or else it's not going anywhere. This people then is on an incomparably higher level than all the others to whom this truth must be taught as a dogma, and for whom it must be bolstered with proofs. And the spirit returns to God who gave it, is said already by Koheles, 12:7. He too does not preach this doctrine, but incorporates it as something known to all in his description of man's demise. Only when sects alien to the spirit of Judaism began to deny the immortality of the soul did it become necessary to teach this doctrine publicly. Even the very existence of God is not taught in the Torah, but is simply taken for granted. Bereshit bara Elokim. It doesn't say, it doesn't have to prove that there's a God. It starts with God created the world, implying that there's a God, right? Finally, let us remember that the idea of the immortality of the soul is not unique to Judaism and Christianity. In spite of the philosophers' attempts to avoid the truth, there have never been a people who truly believe that by burying the remains of their fathers, they had interred their fathers to the ground, in the ground. The Jewish people says that the deceased is Nesef el Amav before the burial. The Kvura is always later. The person himself has already departed long before and has been gathered to his people when his body is lowered into the grave. A safe denotes giving shelter to a straying or readmitting an expelled person into his original home. Accordingly, from Ha'asef, we infer the next world is man's true home, whereas this world comprises the testing years of wandering abroad. When the wandering ends, the spirit returns home and shelters among the souls of its people. It is striking that it never says Ha'asef el avotav, but always Ha'asef el amav. In other words, not I'm going to be gathered to with my forefathers. This isn't some sort of forefather worship. I'm going to be gathered to my people. The sole exception concerns the generation of Yehoshua. Everywhere else, it always says Ha'asef el amav and Shvuv im avotav. A person is buried with his fathers. The child returns to his father and mother. Up above, however, there are no children. There all are close kin. There are no father and mother. What they gave remains below. Up above, the spirit finds only kindred souls, which the one father has breathed into earthly frames. In other words, we don't have family when we go to Shemayim. We're not returning to our families. Our families are souls. They're not people anymore. When we die, we go back to the soul existence. And so our connections that we have in this world are not the same as they will be there. In contrast to Ha'asef el Amav stands the punishment, that soul will be cut off from its people. The soul merits to be gathered unto the souls of its people, only if that soul is worthy of being among them and was not unfaithful down here to their common mission. Perhaps for this reason it says in Shoftim, V'gam kol hador hahud ne'asfu el avotav, in contrast to the following generations, of which it says, Yazvu et Hashem elokei avotam. Yeshua's generation remained faithful to the traditions of their fathers, and they were gathered to the Amav, who on earth had been avotav. Not so the following generation, who were unfaithful to the mission they had received from their fathers. In other words, he's just explaining why is there an exception in Yeshua, and the reason is to contrast them to the generation after them. And so that's what we have. We have many customs and laws related to taking care of people after they die, so that the soul can go back in peace and can merit to see Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mheira amenu, especially after Tchiyat HaMetim, from the rising of the dead, which again is not a concept that's mentioned in the Torah, but it's implied. And it's so obvious that it doesn't have to. The Torah didn't feel the need to have to mention it, to teach it, as it were. We have. It just so happens that in Daf Yomi this week, in Rosh Hashanah Yud Zayin, it talks about the judgment of the souls after Tchiyat HaMetim. Even in that world, according to some opinions, even then, even after the soul's already lived life and already been judged, and already had the 12 months or 11 months of judgment after the year of during the year of after death, the mourning period. Even after that, the soul can be judged during Tchiyat Metim to see if the soul deserves the reward that is awaiting the soul at that point. That is the parsha in a nutshell, and some deeper dives into some of the psukim. I hope you were able to gain something from it. And if you get an opportunity, it's always worthwhile to also listen to last year's class on Chayei Sara 5781 and 5782. I wish you all a good week and a Shabbat Shalom.